Welcome everyone to the Bonita Museum. The exhibition is called Rule 42, Stretched Language, and it is about visual, concrete, and mathematical poetry. The inspiration for the show was based on the work of a friend and colleague, Kaz Mashlanka, and who is a mathematical visual poet. And from Kaz Mashlanka, I was introduced to other visual poets that are included in the show. And the show was basically built around mathematical, visual, and concrete poetry. The title of the show, Rule 42 Stretched Language, comes from this book, which was suggested to us by a fellow in the show from England, Paul Galiunas, and it is a reference to the kind of absurdity that we're living in this day and age. The Hunting of the Snark is an absurd poem that Lewis Carroll wrote shortly after he wrote Alice in Wonderland. And Rule 42 is from the Victorian Naval Journal, or Naval Code. And it says that no one shall speak to the helmsman, and the helmsman will speak to no one. And after the spar on the front of the ship is taken down and varnished, they put it on the rudder, and the helmsman then has to guide the ship backwards into the future. And I thought it was appropriate for the times we're living in. So that was more or less the gist of the title and the feeling behind the show, a kind of the absurdity of what visual poetry points to. And I've tried to include a little bit of everything that visual poetry and concrete poetry covers, including, of course, Mr. Mashlanka's mathematical visual poetry.
1.5 Degrees of Concern is an international collaboration that embraces networked conversations between three women over 200 years living on separate continents during global climate crisis. 1.5 Degrees of Concern is Christine Dykman, Lisa Mansfield, and Liz Wah McManus.
This piece by Dykman, Mansfield, and McManus typifies the title, Rule 42, because it shows the degradation of the environment that has been caused mainly by our leaders. Our leaders are not being responsible for a responsible future. The degradation of the environment is what this piece is all about, and it really does show you very graphically the demise of the environment over the last 100 years.
Hi, I'll talk a little bit about this work. It was the work was done, conceptualized anyway, between the years of 1981 and 1984. Yet the Psycho Vector series was painted in 1988. It's old work, but it addresses some interesting questions that I had when I first experienced looking at Kandinsky's work or any abstract expressionist, where you see motion in the work. And I would see these motions and I would say, well, that one looks faster than this one. Why? And after thinking about it, it dawned on me that because of our interactions with nature, we can see velocities. For instance, if I were to take a handful of mud and sling it rapidly against the wall, it would make an impression down the wall, and you could tell that it was done faster than maybe another handful of mud slung with less velocity and it would just fall. So, using that idea, I noticed when I was studying Newton's kinematics in my physics classes that visual perception and kinematics, there was a relationship. So I'm able to go in and create equations that calculate the visual velocity, the visual momentum, the visual energy, the visual forces that are inside these imagery, even to the extent of calculating what direction and how much motion and energy these fields of triangles have. And that's basically where this word was inspired by. Mathematical visual poetry is a genre of poetics whereby we use math equations to carry a metaphor. In other words, we use the structure of the equations to embed concepts into the variables, and that provides metaphorical expressions. Then also we have visual elements in the works as well that you bounce off the poetic elements of the equations with the imagery. So we bounce off our experience from the visual imagery and the mathematical poetry to create a cluster of metaphors that gives a richness to the pieces that I find enjoyable anyway. Psychronometrics is a word that I coined to describe this piece. Basically, psychological, chrono for time, and metrics for measurement. So we're measuring psychological time. So many of us have experienced that the older we get, the faster time goes by. I remember when I was young, the winters and summers lasted forever. So what this piece does is it enables us to put in the name and birthday of two people, and it will calculate how fast time goes by relative to each other. So if you use someone like your mother, you'll see that time is going by much faster for your mom, and there is a greater psychological time dilation. Well, the key word here is time dilation, because in physics, according to Einstein's special theory of relativity, when a rocket ship takes off from Earth and starts to approach the speed of light, there's a time dilation relative to the observer on Earth. In other words, the time on the spaceship slows down. So when we look at a child, we see time is really slow for them psychologically. So this is very similar to the time dilation that one would experience in a extremely fast rocket ship. So my question was, how fast would the rocket ship have to be traveling to experience this same psychological time dilation with your mother or your father or your child? So this program allows us to calculate that velocity, and it gives us three readings, one from the present date, one from when the youngest person is 1 day old, and another one which basically indicates eternity. So what's interesting is when a person is 1 day old, the velocity is like 99.999999% the speed of light, which indicates that as you start to approach the instant the child is born, the faster you get toward the speed of light, and at the instant the child is born, the child breaks through the light barrier from somewhere else and lands here.
Okay, All Recorded Wars by Doug McCullough is exactly what it states, all the recorded wars throughout history. And it starts at the beginning of recorded time and goes to so far up to 209. We're going to reprint it and include all of the wars since 209, which will include the Gulf Wars and all of the other wars throughout the world. Doug has been working on this for the last maybe 5 or 6 years. Took him 2 years to record up to 209.